Now let's talk about leases. What is a lease? Well, a lease is a contract. A lease is a bilateral contract between the lessor, who is the owner or landlord, and the lessee, who is the tenant. The lease transfers possession and use rights of the property. The lease lasts for a specific length of time. The lease must be signed by both the lessor and the lessee. And remember, with a lease, the lessee has a leasehold estate. Now, there are various types of leases. We're going to talk first about the gross lease. With a gross lease, the tenant pays a fixed rent and usually all of their own utilities, such as gas, electric, cable, telephone, trash, recycling, and all that. And the landlord pays all of the expenses associated with the property, such as property taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance, and routine maintenance and repairs. This is typical of residential leases. Gross lease typically is a residential lease, but can be used for commercial or industrial properties too. The next type of lease we'll talk about is the net lease. With a net lease, the tenant pays a fixed rent plus all or some of the property expenses. So they pay their own utilities. They might pay the taxes, special assessments, and routine maintenance, and so forth. So with a net lease, they pay a fixed rent plus some of the property expenses. A percentage lease is another type of lease. With a percentage lease, the tenant pays a fixed rent plus a percentage of the tenant's gross sales or income. It's typical for retail leases. Percentage leases go with retail properties. Now, a ground lease is used to lease unimproved property or raw land. Any improvements the tenant adds usually become the owner's property at the end of the lease. Ground leases are very common with farmland, when property owners lease portions of their land to other parties who farm the land. Okay, when we talk about leases, there's two different types of evictions that you need to understand. The first type of eviction is constructive eviction. Constructive eviction is the tenant's remedy when the landlord is in default. In other words, the tenant can terminate a lease if the landlord has neglected to fix the unit or make the unit inhabitable. A lease can be terminated if the tenant has to vacate because of the landlord's failure to make the unit habitable. An actual eviction, that's the landlord's remedy when the tenant defaults. An actual eviction is a court action used by a landlord to evict a tenant who is in breach of the lease contract.